Hello and welcome to Oh Hello Maker. Whether you've been crafting with us for a while or this is your first project, it doesn't matter. You're going to absolutely love today's tutorial, hand embroidered gloves. In this video, I'm going to show you all the stitches that you need to learn to embroider your gloves. Some are easier than others, so I do recommend having a little bit of a practice on a piece of fabric first before you actually start on the gloves. Also, you want to keep the ends of the yarn inside the glove as neat as possible. So once you've finished a particular stitch, I do encourage you to secure it neatly at the back, just with a couple of stitches and secure with a knot. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later when you're not having to battle through a load of loose ends and knots when you're trying to put your hand in the glove. I just want you to take a moment to thank yourself for giving yourself this you time, this chance for creativity. I know all too well how absolutely bonkers life can be, and finding the time to actually sit down and do something for you, to do something creative and make something is virtually impossible. But you're here and that's amazing. And don't forget to pass on the discount code that you'll find on the back of your instruction leaflets to friends or loved ones who could do with a little bit more creativity in their lives. Right, that's enough from me. Let's crack on with the project. The running stitch or straight stitch. The stitch is worked by passing the needle in and out of the fabric at a regular distance. So bring your threaded needle up through the fabric and then poke the needle back down through the fabric just a short distance away. You can vary the length of the stitches or you can keep them all small. It's up to you. Once you've completed your running or straight stitch, turn the fabric over, slip the needle underneath a couple of the stitches so it creates a loop, and then thread the needle through to make a little knot. And you can do that a couple of times. The back stitch. This is a short embroidery stitch. And the difference between the running stitch and this is there's no gap in between the stitches. So you want to come up from the back a stitch length away and pull the needle all the way through. Now you want to go back a stitch. Then come up a stitch length away again and put your needle back through the hole that the first stitch went down, and you'll get a nice straight and smooth line. And then secure the thread neatly at the back. The French knot. This has a reputation of being one of the more difficult stitches, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite easy. So pull the needle up through the fabric, take the thread and wrap it around the needle twice. It's important to hold the tension in the thread. Then position your needle so it goes back down through the same hole where it came up. And it will anchor then into a nice French knot. You can experiment by adding additional loops around the needle if you want the knot to be bigger. The satin stitch. Satin stitch is made up of lots of straight stitches that are stitched very closely together so you don't have a gap in between. So start by bringing your needle up from the back and doing one straight stitch upwards. Then again, from the back, bring the needle through very, very closely to the first stitch and work another straight stitch upwards. Now I'm not going to work along the entire line, but you get the idea. The lazy daisy stitch. Bring your needle up from the back of the fabric, then insert the needle next to where you just came up. Hold the thread up out of the way, then bring the needle up at the desired length of your petal. Pull the needle through, making sure the thread is looped round. As you pull tighter, you'll see the petal shape form. Now you want to insert the needle back underneath where you just came up, and then you start the process all over again. So bringing your needle from the back through the fabric, then inserting the needle next to just where you came up, then inserting the needle to where you just came up, bring the needle up at the desired length of the petal or leaf, and then pull the thread all the way through. Do a little stitch just behind to secure it in place, and then come up in the centre of the flower again to start it all over again. Then when you've finished all 5 petals, thread your needle to the back of the fabric and secure with a couple of stitches and finally a knot. And those will be the main stitches that we'll be using on our embroidered gloves. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is unscrew the hoop, place the smaller hoop inside the glove and the larger hoop on the outside of the glove, and then tighten up the screw and slip in a piece of card. Trace off the long-stemmed flower and pin it to the front of the glove. Now here's a really clever technique to get the yarn through the eye of the needle. Cut a little piece of paper, roughly about 1 centimetre by about 3 or 4 centimetres. See if it actually fits through the eye of the needle first. And then pop your yarn, sandwich it in, and then put it through the eye of the needle. So make a knot at the end of the dark green yarn. Put your hand inside the glove and insert the needle from the back and come up right at the top of the stem. Pull the thread gently through so that the knot doesn't pass through the glove because the loops are quite big. And then what you want to do is stitch a few straight stitches together just to create that little base of the flower. And now we're going to be working back stitch. So you want to come out about a stitch away and do 1 stitch backwards. Then again, come out about a stitch away, pull the thread all the way through, then insert the needle at the end of your previous stitch. Keep working back stitch all the way down the stem. Check underneath the stabiliser just to make sure you're not going across the cable design. And now we're going to work some lazy daisy stitches to create the leaves. So bring your needle up from the back of the fabric, Then insert the needle next to just where you came up. And then you want to bring the needle up at the desired length of the leaf. Make sure the yarn is looped round and then pull the thread all the way through to create a little leaf. Then insert the needle just behind and then come out at a place where you want your next leaf to be, and then repeat the process. So you want to go back through the fabric and then up again at the desired length of the leaf. If at any point the stitches become confusing, go back to the stitch guide at the beginning of this video. Once you've finished all of the leaves, thread your needle through to the back. Loosen off the hoop and take out the smaller hoop. Take out the piece of card and then turn your glove inside out. You want to secure the stitches at the back so they're nice and neat. So slip the needle underneath a thread and make a little knot. And then snip off any excess. Pop the hoop back on. Don't forget to insert the piece of card as well. And now we're going to be working the flower in the hot pink yarn. So bring the needle up right next to those straight stitches you did in the dark green. We're now going to fill the flower head with satin stitch, which is straight stitches that are stitched very, very closely together. Keep working the stitches. Pull the stabiliser out a little bit so you can see how the stitches are falling. And feel free to add any more stitches to the flower. You could even add a little flower to the smaller stem as well if you wish. And then as before, this time I didn't actually take the hoop off. Go inside the glove, make a stitch, make a little loop, tie a knot, do that a couple of times, and then snip off any excess. There you go. So now we're going to be working French knots in the centre of the flower. So you want to thread your needle with the pale pink yarn. Just check inside the glove to make sure that the knot hasn't slipped through the loops of the glove. Then, as I showed you in the stitch guide, you want to take the thread and wrap it around the needle twice. Then, keeping the tension, insert the needle back through the same hole. It can be quite fiddly, but keep that tension on there. Pull it all the way through and give it a bit of a tug. There we go. I'm going to just do one loop this time to make a smaller French knot. Pull it all the way through. Now, if you're finding that your French knots are a bit bobbly, it might mean that one of the threads hasn't been pulled securely. So go into your glove, find any of those loose ends and just give them a bit of a tug and it will neaten up the French knot. And then finally, we're going to do a third French knot, just with one loop again. Insert back into the hole. Catch the needle with the other hand. There we go. A bit bobbly, but I think it looks okay. And again, finish off with a couple of stitches at the back to neaten off. And cut off the loose ends. Snip round the stabiliser, making sure not to snip through any of your yarn or the gloves. And then pin on the large petal flower. And we're going to create the petals using Lazy Daisy stitch again. So we're using this beautiful cornflower blue for these flowers. Once you've finished the large blue flower, you can make a smaller one towards the bottom of the glove. And then check the flower and then back through the centre, finishing off those stitches at the back, nice and neatly, and then snip off all of that stabiliser, again making sure not to cut through any loops. We're now going to make a French knot in the centre of the blue flower using your orange embroidery thread. So you can make these knots as big or small as you like. Obviously they're using embroidery thread, so it's much more fine. As you can see, I've got a funny little loop there, but I found it at the back and I pulled it through, and that makes a lovely neat one. So I'm going to do a couple of loops for the smaller one and insert it back through the middle of the flower, and that makes a really teeny tiny one. Now, continuing with French knots, thread your needle with some white yarn, secure with a knot at the end. Come up along the cabling design and create as many French knots as you like along here. You can have a play about whether you do 2 or 3 loops. You could even try 4 loops for a really chunky knot. It's entirely up to you. Now add on one of the little straight stitch flowers, pinning it in place. Come up from the centre and you want to do 1 straight stitch, making sure the needle comes out at the end. Keep working your way all around the flower until you've got your 5 little straight stitches. I guess they're back stitches actually, but anyway, you get the gist. There we go, sweet little pink flower. And now it's time for us to do our second long-stemmed flower, which uses exactly the same technique as we did on the first long-stemmed flower. So we traced off the design, pinned the stabiliser in place, and then using the dark green yarn, do 3 straight stitches at the top of the stem, and then work back stitch all the way down as far as you like. Keep checking underneath. And then bring the needle up where you want your lazy daisy stitch to be for your leaf. Work a couple of those. And one more. And now use your hot pink yarn to fill in the flower head using the satin stitches. Work your stitches really close together so you can't see any of the stabiliser through the stitches. And then finally we're going to work those French knots in the centre of the flower. So we're going to have 3 French knots. I'm just doing 1 loop around the needle this time. And it seems to be giving a really lovely result. All the way through to the back. And then carefully snip away the stabiliser. Add another petalled flower, this time using the hot pink, just next to the long stem flower. Try to avoid stitching onto the cable design, but if you do, it doesn't matter. This flower I decided to only give 4 petals to. It's up to you whether you give your flowers 4 or 5 petals. And then add some French knots with the orange embroidery thread. If you run out of the embroidery thread at any point, don't worry, just use one of the other colours. And now you want to add some more French knots along the cable design. Again, you can do as many or as little as you like. This mustard yarn is actually quite chunky, and so you only need to wrap it round maybe twice to get a really chunky knot. And now I'm going to add some dusky pink French knots. And finally, some of the lovely sage green knots as well. And so that's our design finished. The next thing you want to do, and it might be a bit scary, is turn your glove inside out. You want to secure any loose ends you possibly can, so thread them through using our special technique with the paper. Thread it through the eye of the needle, make a couple of stitches, make a loop, make a knot, and then snip off those loose ends. Turn your glove the right way out. And now we want to actually get rid of the stabiliser. So for the video, I'm putting it in a bowl of water, but you can just run it under the tap at home if you like. Use your finger to rub away the stabiliser. Give it a bit of a wring out. Have a check. You might need to go back in the water again. And then once all of the stabiliser has gone, give it a really good wring out, but a gentle one because you don't want to ruin those stitches. Make sure all the stitches are okay, and then leave it to dry. I recommend popping it on the radiator. And there you go, an embroidered glove. You just need to repeat the process to do the second one.